The widow Amelia Kendrick's breath rose in white clouds as she stood outside the pawnbroker's shop in Fort Bridger, Wyoming Territory, her hand trembling as she twisted the gold band around her finger one last time before stepping through the door that would seal her defeat. December of 1876 had descended upon the small settlement with a cruelty she had not anticipated. When Thomas had died that spring, kicked by a spooked horse and gone before the doctor could even arrive, she had believed herself strong enough to manage the ranch alone. She had survived the summer, even prospered through autumn, but winter brought expenses she could not have foreseen. The livestock needed more feed than she had stored. The roof developed 3 separate leaks during the first snow. The wood supply dwindled faster than expected, and firewood cost more than her pride could bear to pay. Now, with $14 to her name and another month of winter stretching before her like an endless white desert, Amelia found herself standing before Marcus Webb's counter, the pawnbroker's calculating eyes already assessing what she had come to sell. "Mrs. Kendrick," he said, not unkindly. "What can I do for you today?" Her throat felt tight as she slowly pulled the ring from her finger. The metal seemed to resist, clinging to her as though it knew what she was about to do. "I need to sell this." Marcus picked up the ring with pudgy fingers, holding it to the light from the window. The thin band gleamed dully, a simple piece of gold with no ornamentation, no diamonds, nothing to make it valuable to anyone but her. "I can give you $20. "20." The word came out strangled. She had hoped for more, though she knew it was a fool's hope. "Gold is gold, Mrs. Kendrick." "It is a small ring. $20 is fair." Fair. Nothing about any of this was fair. Fair would have been Thomas living, his strong hands still working their land, his laugh still filling their small cabin. Fair would have been a world where widows did not have to sell their memories to survive the winter. "25, she heard herself say, hating the desperation in her voice. Marcus shook his head. "I have to make a profit too. 20 is my offer." She closed her eyes and nodded. The ring clinked softly as he dropped it into his cash box, then counted out $20 in bills and coins. The money felt obscene in her hand, a betrayal of everything that ring had meant. Amelia left the shop without another word, tucking the money into her coat pocket and pulling her thin shawl tighter against the wind that cut down the main street. She needed to purchase flour and cornmeal, some salted pork if there was any to be had, and she needed to save enough for lamp oil. The list felt impossibly long for $20. She did not see the tall man who had been standing near the window of the general store, watching her emerge from the pawnbroker's with shoulders curved in defeat. Yates Drummond had arrived in Fort Bridger 3 days earlier, leading a small herd of cattle he had driven up from Colorado for a rancher named Peterson. The job was finished, his pay was secure in his pocket, and he had been planning to move on, perhaps head toward Montana before the passes became completely impassable. But something about the woman with the dark hair and grief-stained eyes had caught his attention when he first saw her in the mercantile 2 days ago. And now, seeing her leave the pawnbroker's with that particular set to her shoulders, he found himself curious. Yates was 32 years old, weathered by years of driving cattle and sleeping under stars, his face tanned dark by sun and wind. He was tall enough that most men had to look up to meet his eyes, broad-shouldered from hard work, his hands calloused and capable. He had never married, never stayed in one place long enough for roots to take hold, and had convinced himself that he preferred it that way. He waited until the widow had disappeared into the mercantile before he crossed the street to the pawnbroker's shop. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and Marcus looked up with the perpetual hope of all merchants seeing a potential customer. "Help you with something?" The woman who was just in here. She sold something. Marcus's expression became guarded. I do not discuss my customers' business. Yates pulled out a $20 gold piece and set it on the counter. What did she sell? The gold piece disappeared into Marcus's hand with practiced speed. A wedding ring. Simple gold band. You interested in buying it? How much? $30. Yates raised an eyebrow. You gave her 20. I am running a business, not a charity. Yates considered walking out, leaving the pawnbroker to his profit-mongering, but the image of the widow's face would not leave his mind. He counted out $30, and Marcus retrieved the ring from his cash box, handing it over with a satisfied expression. The ring was warm from being in the box, and lighter than Yates expected. He could see the inscription inside, worn but still legible. Thomas and Amelia, 1871. 5 years of marriage, ended by whatever circumstances left her alone and desperate enough to sell this. He slipped the ring into his vest pocket and left the shop, standing for a moment on the boardwalk as snow began to fall again, light flakes that caught in his hair and on his shoulders. The logical part of his mind told him to leave town, to forget about the widow and her troubles. He had his own life to live, his own path to follow. But logic had never been as compelling as instinct, and his instinct told him that something important was happening, that this moment mattered in ways he could not yet understand. Amelia emerged from the mercantile carrying a canvas sack heavy with supplies, her expression slightly less strained now that she had food secured. Yates watched her begin walking toward the edge of town, where a small wagon and tired-looking horse waited. He followed at a distance, not wanting to alarm her but wanting to know where she lived. The ranch was about 2 miles outside of town, a modest spread with a small cabin, a barn that had seen better years, and corrals that held a few head of cattle and some chickens scratching in the snow. Yates watched from a distance as she unhitched the wagon and led the horse into the barn, then carried her supplies into the cabin. Smoke began rising from the chimney a few minutes later. He turned his horse back toward town, his mind working through possibilities. He could simply ride up to her door, return the ring, and leave. But something told him that approach would not work. A woman proud enough to endure until winter forced her hand would not accept charity from a stranger. She would refuse, perhaps even be insulted. No, this would require a more careful approach. That evening, Yates took a room at the boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Patterson, a widow herself who proved to be a font of information once he bought her a cup of coffee and expressed interest in settling in the area. "You are thinking of staying in Fort Bridger?" she asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Most cowboys just pass through." "I am getting tired of the trail," he said, which was not entirely untrue. "Thought it might be time to put down some roots. I heard there might be some ranch land available." "Well, there is the Kendrick place," Mrs. Patterson said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Poor Amelia Kendrick. Her husband died last spring. Terrible accident. She has been trying to run the place herself, but everyone knows it is only a matter of time before she has to sell. Woman alone cannot manage a ranch, especially not through a Wyoming winter. She has no family to help. Her parents died of cholera when she was 16. Thomas was all she had. Now she has nothing but that ranch and her pride, and pride will not keep you warm or fed." Yates absorbed this information, his fingers unconsciously touching the ring in his pocket. "You think she would sell?" "I think she does not want to, but sometimes we have to do things we do not want to do. You could ride out there, make her an offer. Though I warn you, she is stubborn as a mule. Turned down 3 offers already, and one of them from Harold Peterson, who owns the biggest spread in the territory." "Maybe she just needs the right offer," Yates said. He spent the next day riding around the area, ostensibly looking at land, but actually trying to formulate a plan. The ring seemed to burn in his pocket, a constant reminder of the widow struggling alone in her cabin. Snow fell steadily throughout the day, and by evening he had made his decision. The next morning he rode out to the Kendrick ranch, arriving just as Amelia was carrying water from the well to the barn. She looked up at the sound of his horse, her expression immediately wary. A woman alone had to be cautious of strange men appearing at her door. "Morning, madam," Yates called out, stopping his horse a respectful distance away. "Name is Yates Drummond. I am looking for work, and I heard in town you might need a hand around here." Amelia set down the water buckets, her back straightening. "I do not know who told you that, but they were mistaken. I am managing fine on my own." "I am sure you are," Yates said carefully, "but winter is not half done yet and I need work. I am good with horses, can mend fences, handle cattle. I am not asking for much, just meals and a place to sleep in the barn. You could pay me in the spring when you sell your calves. I cannot afford help. That is why I am offering to wait for payment." She studied him with sharp blue eyes that had probably once held more warmth. Now they were cautious, measuring, looking for the angle he must surely have. "Why would you do that?" "Because I need a place to stay for the winter, and you need help whether you admit it or not. I passed your north fence line on the way here. It is down in 3 places. You have cattle wandering onto open range, and if you do not get them back soon, someone else will claim them. Your barn roof has a hole in it. Your woodpile is not big enough to last another month." Color rose in her cheeks, whether from cold or anger or embarrassment, he could not tell. "You are very observant. I am practical. I am offering a fair trade, my work for room and board. In the spring, if you are satisfied, you can pay me what you think I am worth. If you are not satisfied, I will leave and we will call it even." Amelia was silent for a long moment, and he could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Pride against necessity. Independence against reality. "The barn is cold," she finally said. "I have slept in worse places. I cannot feed you much, beans and cornbread mostly." "I am not particular about food." Another pause. Then she nodded, a quick, sharp movement. "Fine, but I am the boss here. You do what I say when I say it, and you sleep in the barn. I will not have gossip starting up about impropriety." "Yes, madam, that is fair." He dismounted and extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she shook it. Her hand was small in his, but her grip was firm, her palm calloused from work. "I am Amelia Kendrick. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Kendrick. You can put your horse in the second stall. There is hay in the loft. I will bring you some blankets and show you where everything is." Over the next few days, Yates threw himself into work with a dedication that surprised even him. He repaired the barn roof, mended the fences, tracked down the wandering cattle and drove them back to the ranch. He chopped wood until the pile was twice the size it had been. He fixed the leaking roof on the cabin. He mucked out the barn and reinforced the chicken coop, where a fox had been getting in. Amelia watched him work with an expression he could not quite read. She fed him as promised, simple meals but hot and filling, and she was scrupulously careful to never be alone with him in any way that could be considered improper. She left his meals on the porch of the cabin, called instructions from a distance, treated him with polite formality and nothing more. But he caught her watching him sometimes, when she thought he was not paying attention. And he watched her too, learning her routines, the way she moved with efficient grace despite her tiredness, the way she talked to the animals with more softness than she showed to him, the way she stood sometimes at the window of the cabin, looking out at nothing, her face full of a grief she would not let herself express. 2 weeks after he had arrived, a storm blew in that made the previous snowfalls look like spring flurries. The wind howled like a living thing, and snow came down so thick that Yates could not see the cabin from the barn. He had brought extra hay down from the loft for the horses and the milk cow, and was settling in for a cold night when he heard a pounding on the barn door. He yanked it open to find Amelia, covered in snow, her shawl pulled over her head. "You cannot stay out here tonight," she shouted over the wind. "You will freeze to death." "I will be fine," he shouted back. "That is an order, not a suggestion. Get your blankets and come to the cabin." She turned and fought her way back through the storm, and after a moment's hesitation, Yates grabbed his bedroll and followed. The distance between barn and cabin felt like miles in the blinding snow. By the time he stumbled through the cabin door, his face was numb and his fingers ached with cold. Inside, the cabin was blessedly warm, heated by a fire in the hearth and the cast iron stove. It was a single large room with a bed in one corner, a table and chairs, a few shelves holding dishes and supplies. Simple but clean, with touches that spoke of happier times. A quilt on the bed in a wedding ring pattern, a set of china cups that looked too fine for everyday use, a photograph on the mantel showing a younger Amelia and a handsome man with his arm around her shoulders. "You can sleep by the fire," Amelia said, already turning away. "I will stay on my side of the room. There is coffee on the stove if you want it." "Thank you." They maintained a careful distance at first, Amelia sitting at the table mending a shirt, Yates arranging his bedroll by the fire. But as the storm raged outside and the evening wore on, the silence became less hostile and more companionable. "You are a good worker," Amelia finally said, not looking up from her mending. "Better than I expected." "You expected me to be lazy. I expected you to have some angle, some scheme." "Men do not usually offer to work for nothing." "I am not working for nothing. You are feeding me and giving me shelter. But not paying you until spring, if I can pay you then at all." She set down her mending and looked at him directly. "Why are you really here, Mr. Drummond?" He considered several lies, all of which died on his tongue under her steady gaze. "I saw you in town, coming out of the pawnbroker's. You looked like you were carrying the weight of the world." Her expression closed off. "That is none of your concern, I know, but I thought maybe I could help." "Why would you want to help a complete stranger?" That was the question he had been asking himself for 2 weeks. He still did not have a good answer, at least not one he could put into words. "Maybe I am tired of only looking out for myself." Amelia studied him for a long moment, then returned to her mending. "My husband was a good man. He died trying to calm a spooked horse. One kick and he was gone. I did not even get to say goodbye. I am sorry. Everyone is sorry. Sorry does not pay the bills or fix the fences or keep you warm in winter." Her voice was bitter, but underneath the bitterness was an ocean of grief. "I thought I could do this alone. I thought if I just worked hard enough, wanted it enough, I could keep this place running. But winter does not care how hard you work. You are still here. That counts for something." "Am I? Because I had to sell my wedding ring to buy food. I sold the last piece of my husband I had left, and for what? Another few weeks of pretending I can survive." Yates reached into his pocket and felt the ring there. He could give it to her now, return it, and tell her the truth. But something made him hesitate. It was not the right moment. She was not ready to accept it, and if he gave it to her now, she would refuse it, would probably send him away immediately. So instead he said, "You have survived this long. That takes strength, or stupidity. I have found that strength and stupidity often look the same from a distance." That surprised a short laugh out of her, the first he had heard. It transformed her face, giving him a glimpse of who she must have been before grief had carved itself into her features. "That might be the truest thing anyone has said to me in months." They talked more that night than they had in the previous 2 weeks combined. She told him about Thomas, about their dreams for the ranch, about the life they had planned together. He told her about his years on the trail, about the cattle drives and the towns he had passed through, about the rootless existence he had led for so long. The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving the world buried in white. Yates returned to the barn and his work, but something had shifted between them. Amelia no longer maintained quite so much distance. She lingered sometimes when she brought him meals, asking his opinion on ranch matters, sharing her concerns about the remaining cattle and whether they would make it through the winter. Christmas came and went quietly. Amelia made a special meal of roasted chicken and biscuits, and Yates gave her a new pair of work gloves he had ordered from the mercantile, practical but necessary. She looked at them for a long moment before accepting them, and he thought he saw tears in her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. "Thank you," she said softly. "I needed these." January brought more snow and bitter cold, but it also brought a thaw of a different kind. They began eating meals together at the cabin table rather than Amelia leaving his food on the porch. They worked side by side on some of the chores, and Yates noticed that she seemed lighter somehow, as though the burden she carried had been distributed across two sets of shoulders instead of one. He was falling in love with her. He realized one evening as he watched her brush down her horse, talking to the animal in a low, gentle voice. It was not a sudden thunderbolt realization, but rather a gradual understanding, like watching dawn slowly illuminate a landscape. He loved her strength and her stubbornness, her refusal to give up even when everything seemed lost. He loved the way she threw herself into work, the way she cared for her animals, the way she was slowly beginning to smile again. But he did not tell her. How could he? He was a drifter who had inserted himself into her life under somewhat false pretenses. He had her wedding ring in his pocket, and every day that passed without him returning it felt like a deeper deception. In early February, Harold Peterson rode out to the ranch with two of his hands. Peterson was a thick-bodied man in his 50s, prosperous and self-satisfied, the kind of man who was used to getting what he wanted. "Mrs. Kendrick," he said, tipping his hat as Amelia emerged from the cabin. "I heard you took on a hand for the winter. News travels fast." "It is a small territory. I also heard you might be reconsidering selling this place." "I have not made any decisions." Peterson's gaze moved to Yates, who was standing near the barn, his hand resting casually on the hammer he had been using to repair a stall door. "You know my offer still stands. $3,000 for the land, the buildings, and the livestock. That is more than fair. It is less than what Thomas and I paid for it, and we have made improvements since then." "Thomas is dead, Mrs. Kendrick. That is a hard truth, but it is the truth. You cannot run this place alone." "She is not alone," Yates said, walking forward. "And I do not recall you being invited to offer your opinions on what she can or cannot do." Peterson's expression hardened. "And who are you exactly?" "I am her ranch hand." "A hired hand does not get a say in business matters." "Maybe not. But a friend does." Peterson looked between them, his eyes narrowing. "I see. Well, Mrs. Kendrick, when you come to your senses and realize that playing rancher with your hired friend is not sustainable, my offer will still be available, though it might not be quite so generous after another few weeks of winter expenses." He rode off with his men, and Amelia stood staring after them, her jaw tight. "He is right, you know, about most of it." "About which part?" "About me not being able to run this place, about winter expenses, about the fact that I am fighting a losing battle." Yates moved closer, close enough that he could see the freckles scattered across her nose, the way her breath steamed in the cold air. "Do you want to sell?" "No. I want to keep this place, to make it work, to prove that Thomas and I did not dream for nothing. But wanting something does not make it possible." What if I stayed on? Not just for the winter, but permanently. We could be partners. You would not have to do this alone anymore." She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw hope warring with caution. "Why would you do that? You are a drifter. You said yourself you have never stayed in one place." "Maybe I am tired of drifting. Maybe I found a reason to stay." "What reason?" he almost told her then. Almost pulled the ring from his pocket and said everything he had been holding back. But Peterson's visit had unsettled her, and he did not want her to think he was taking advantage of her vulnerability. "This is good land," he said instead. "It could be a successful ranch with 2 people working it." She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We should discuss terms. If we are going to be partners, it needs to be a proper business arrangement." They spent that evening working out the details. Yates would invest his savings into the ranch. They would split the profits, and they would both have equal say in decisions. It was practical and businesslike, but underneath the discussion of cattle and feed and expenses, there was a current of something else, something neither of them was quite ready to name. The winter slowly loosened its grip. February gave way to March, and the snow began to melt, revealing brown grass and mud and the first tentative signs of spring. The cattle had survived, thin but alive, and the calving season began with promise. Yates had moved some of his belongings into the cabin, sleeping in a corner that they had partitioned off with a blanket for propriety's sake. They worked together during the day and spent the evenings talking, planning for the ranch's future, slowly building a partnership that felt like it was growing into something more. One evening in late March, as they sat at the table reviewing their accounts, Amelia said, "I never thought I would feel happy again. After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. And now I think maybe there are different kinds of happiness. Maybe what I had before is gone, but maybe there can be something new, something different but still good." She looked at him directly. "You have given me back hope, Yates. I do not know how to thank you for that." "You do not have to thank me." "Yes, I do. When you showed up here, I thought you were just another problem I would have to deal with. Instead, you became—" She paused, seeming to search for the right word. "A friend. A true friend." The word friend felt both right and completely inadequate for what he felt, but he did not correct her. Instead, he reached across the table and took her hand, marveling at how natural it felt when she did not pull away. "Amelia," he said, and her name felt important on his tongue, a weight and a promise. "I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, there was a knock at the door. Amelia pulled her hand away and went to answer it, revealing Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house, looking distressed. "Mrs. Kendrick, Mr. Drummond, I am so sorry to bother you, but there has been an accident in town. The Peterson ranch hands were drinking at the saloon and started a fight. The sheriff is asking for any able-bodied men to help calm things down before someone gets killed." Yates was on his feet immediately. "I will come." "Be careful," Amelia said, her eyes worried. The situation in town was chaotic when he arrived. 6 men were brawling in the street outside the saloon, and a crowd had gathered to watch. Yates helped the sheriff and 2 deputies separate the fighters and get them locked in the jail to cool off. One of Peterson's men had a broken nose, another a gash across his forehead that would need stitching, but no one was seriously injured. It was nearly midnight by the time order was restored, and Yates could head back to the ranch. He was tired and bruised from hauling struggling men apart, but his mind was on Amelia and the conversation that had been interrupted. He found her waiting up, sitting at the table with a cup of tea, her face lighting with relief when he walked through the door. "You are all right." "Just some bruises, nothing serious." He sat down across from her, suddenly nervous. "About what I was going to say earlier. It can wait if you are tired. No, it has waited long enough." He pulled the ring from his pocket where it had lived for months now, growing warm from his body heat, waiting for this moment. "I saw you that day in December, leaving the pawnbrokers. I saw how much it hurt you and I could not stand it, so I went in after you and bought this back." He set the ring on the table between them, the gold catching the lamplight. Amelia stared at it, her face going pale. "You bought my wedding ring. I know I should have given it back right away. I know I should have told you. But I could not figure out how to do it without making you feel like you were accepting charity, and I knew you would never accept that. So I kept it, and I waited, and the longer I waited the harder it became to tell you." She picked up the ring with trembling fingers, slipping it onto her left hand where it settled into the worn groove it had left behind. "Why? Why would you do this?" "Because even then, before I knew you, I could see your strength. I could see that you deserved better than to have to sell your memories to survive. And then I got to know you and He took a deep breath. "I fell in love with you, Amelia. I did not plan to. I did not even want to. But watching you fight to keep this place, seeing your courage and your determination, working beside you and talking with you and learning who you are beneath the grief, I could not help it." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was not looking at the ring anymore. She was looking at him. "I thought it was just me. I thought I was betraying Thomas by feeling something for you. You are not betraying anyone. You are allowed to live to be happy again. I know that in my head. My heart has taken longer to understand." She stood up and he stood too, and then she was in his arms, fitting against him like she belonged there. "I love you too. I think I have for weeks, but I was too afraid to admit it." He kissed her then, gently at first, then deeper as she responded, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressing close. It was a kiss that tasted of salt from her tears and coffee from her tea and hope for a future that was suddenly bright with possibility. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Amelia looked down at the ring on her finger. "What do I do with this?" "Whatever you want. It is yours." She was quiet for a moment, turning the ring slowly. Then she slipped it off and went to the mantel, placing it carefully in a small wooden box next to the photograph of her and Thomas. "This was part of my past, and I will always treasure it, but it belongs to my memories now, not my present." She turned back to Yates, and in her eyes he saw a future unfolding, full of springs and summers, hard work and shared dreams, a partnership that had grown into love. "I want a new ring," she said, "when the time is right. A new beginning, not trying to recreate what I had before." "Whenever you are ready." She came back to him, taking his hands in hers. "I think I am ready now. We could go to the justice of the peace in town tomorrow. Simple and quick, just the two of us. Unless you want something bigger, I just want you." So the next morning, they rode into Fort Bridger together and were married by Justice Cooper in his office, with Mrs. Patterson and the sheriff as witnesses. It was simple and unceremonious, but when Yates slipped a new gold band onto Amelia's finger, one he had bought that morning from the jeweler, he felt like his whole life had been leading to this moment. That night, in the cabin that was now truly theirs together, they came together as husband and wife, discovering each other with gentle hands and whispered words, building something new on the foundation of honesty and love they had created. The spring brought new challenges, as it always did. The calves were born, some thriving and some struggling. The fences needed constant repair. The garden needed planting. But now there were two of them to share the work and the worry and the small victories. In May, Harold Peterson rode out to the ranch again, this time alone. He found Yates and Amelia working together to brand the new calves, a messy and exhausting job that left them both sweaty and covered in dust. "I heard you two got married," Peterson said without preamble. "News travels fast. Amelia said, echoing her words from his last visit. I suppose congratulations are in order. Peterson did not sound particularly congratulatory. I also suppose this means you will not be selling. That is correct, Yates said. We are building this ranch together. It is not for sale at any price. Peterson nodded slowly. Fair enough. I just hope you know what you are getting into. Ranching is hard enough with a full crew. 2 people trying to run a place like this, even 2 people in love, that is a tall order. Then I suppose it is lucky we are both stubborn, Amelia said, and there was steel in her voice that made Yates proud. After Peterson left, they stood together looking out over their land, at the cattle grazing and the mountains rising in the distance and the cabin that was slowly becoming a home rather than just a shelter. You think he is right? Amelia asked. That we are taking on too much, maybe. But I think we can do anything if we do it together. She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. I never thought I would be grateful for that terrible winter. But if it had not forced me to sell my ring, if you had not seen me and decided to help, none of this would have happened. Winter made you sell your ring, Yates said quietly, but it also brought us together. Summer came in full force, hot and bright, and the ranch prospered in ways neither of them had dared hope. The cattle fattened on the good grass, the garden produced more vegetables than they could eat, and slowly their bank account grew from almost nothing to a modest cushion against future hardship. In August, Amelia realized she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening after supper, watching his face carefully as though unsure how he would react. A baby, he repeated, and then a slow smile spread across his face. We are going to have a baby in March, I think. Are you happy? He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as though she might break. Happy does not even begin to cover it. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about adding another room to the cabin, about teaching their child to ride, about the family they would build together. That night, lying in bed with Amelia's head on his chest, Yates thought about how much his life had changed in less than a year. He had arrived in Fort Bridger as a drifter with no particular destination, and now he had a wife, a ranch, and a child on the way. He had a home. The winter of 1877 was milder than the previous year, but Yates still made sure they were prepared with plenty of firewood, ample food stores, and the barn in good repair. He was taking no chances with Amelia pregnant and the new life they had built. On a cold night in March, as a late-season storm howled outside, Amelia went into labor. Yates rode through the snow to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Carson, and spent the longest hours of his life pacing outside the bedroom they had added to the cabin, listening to Amelia's cries and feeling utterly helpless. Finally, as dawn was breaking and the storm was clearing, he heard a different cry, high and thin and unmistakably new. Mrs. Carson opened the door with a tired but satisfied smile. You have a son, Mr. Drummond. A healthy, loud son. Yates entered the room to find Amelia propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, but these were tears of joy. Come meet your son, she said softly. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the impossibly small face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with dark, unfocused eyes, already alert and curious about his new world. What should we name him? Amelia asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one, unable to agree or perhaps unwilling to commit to something so important. But looking at his son now, Yates knew exactly what felt right. William, he said, after my father, if that is all right with you. William Drummond, Amelia said, testing the name. Yes, I like it. Hello, William. Welcome to the world. The baby made a small noise, and they both laughed, giddy with exhaustion and wonder. Life with a baby was harder than either of them had anticipated. William was colicky and did not sleep through the night for months. Amelia was exhausted from nursing and recovering from the birth. The ranch work could not stop just because they had a new baby. So Yates found himself doing the work of two people while trying to help with William whenever he could. But even in the hardest moments, when William was screaming at 2 in the morning and the cattle had broken through a fence and nothing seemed to be going right, Yates could not imagine being anywhere else. This was his family, his home, his life, and he would not trade it for anything. As William grew from a helpless infant into a curious baby, the ranch continued to thrive. They hired a young man named Jack to help with the work, which eased the burden considerably. They bought more cattle, expanded their grazing range, and began making a real profit. In the fall of 1878, Amelia suggested they have a proper wedding celebration. "I know we are already married," she said, "but we never had a real wedding with friends and family and a party. I think we have earned it, do not you?" So they planned a celebration for October, after the fall roundup was finished. They invited everyone they knew in Fort Bridger and the surrounding ranches. They roasted a pig and a side of beef. Amelia baked 3 different kinds of pie, and Mrs. Patterson made her famous potato salad. There was dancing and music and laughter, and for one perfect evening their little ranch was filled with joy. Even Harold Peterson came, offering a grudging congratulations and admitting that they had proved him wrong about their ability to run the ranch. "You two have done well," he said. "I will not make you another offer. This place is yours, and you have earned it." As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Yates found Amelia standing a little apart from the crowd, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the mountains gold. William was asleep in her arms, his small hand curled against her chest. "Happy?" he asked, putting his arm around her shoulders. "More than I ever thought I could be again," she said. "Sometimes I feel guilty about that, about being happy when Thomas is gone. He would want you to be happy." "I know, and I think he would have liked you. You are a good man, Yates Drummond, a good husband and a good father and a good partner. I am lucky I sold that ring because it brought you into my life." "I am the lucky one," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I spent years wandering, never knowing what I was looking for. Turns out I was looking for you." The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs, as all years do. There were droughts and good rains, hard winters and mild ones, cattle that sickened and cattle that thrived. In 1880, Amelia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah. 2 years later came another son, James. The cabin expanded with the family. New rooms added as needed until it bore little resemblance to the simple structure Yates had first seen. The ranch grew too, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. They hired more hands, built a new barn, and invested in improving their breeding stock. But through all the changes, the core remained the same. Yates and Amelia, working side by side, building something lasting together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates found Amelia in the barn, brushing down her horse while the children played in the yard outside. She was 36 now, her dark hair showing the first threads of gray, her hands permanently calloused from work. To him, she had never been more beautiful. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. She opened it to find a new gold ring, wider than her wedding band, with 3 small diamonds set in it. "Yates, this is too much. Look at the inscription." She held it to the light and read the words engraved inside. "Winter brought us together, love keeps us close." Tears welled in her eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger, next to her wedding band. "Do you remember that first winter?" she asked. How desperate and hopeless everything seemed. I remember watching you come out of that pawnbroker's shop, looking like the world had beaten you, but you were still standing. I remember thinking I had never seen anyone so strong. I felt weak. I felt like I had failed at everything. You were surviving. And then you let me help you, which took even more strength. You could have sent me away. You could have held onto your pride and your independence and lost everything. But you took a chance on a stranger who showed up at your door. She reached up and cupped his face in her work-roughened hands. Best decision I ever made. Well, second best. The best was saying yes when you asked me to marry you. They kissed as they had kissed countless times before, but it still felt new, still held the promise and passion of those early days. Outside, they could hear their children laughing, the sound of their happiness filling the air like music. That evening, after the children were asleep, Yates and Amelia sat on the porch watching the stars come out. The wooden box that held her first wedding ring was on her lap. She had kept it all these years, a reminder of her first love and the life that had ended too soon. You ever wonder what would have happened if Thomas had not died? Yates asked. If that horse had not spooked, if you had never had to sell your ring? Sometimes, she admitted. But I try not to dwell on it. That was a different life, a different version of me. I loved Thomas and I grieved him deeply. But I love you too, differently perhaps, but just as truly. I am not the same person I was then. Losing him broke something in me, but you helped me build something new from the pieces. I think you rebuilt yourself. I just held the hammer sometimes. She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. We make a good team. The best. The years continued to roll past, bringing grandchildren and new challenges, and the simple, profound satisfaction of a life well lived. Yates never forgot that winter day when he saw a stranger leave a pawnbroker's shop and made a decision that changed everything. Sometimes the smallest moments hold the biggest consequences, and sometimes a simple act of kindness can ripple out in ways never imagined. By the time Yates and Amelia celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in 1902, Fort Bridger had grown from a small settlement into a thriving town. The Wild West was fading into memory, becoming tamed and civilized, but their ranch remained, a testament to hard work and stubborn determination. Their children had grown into capable adults. William, now 24, had taken over most of the day-to-day running of the ranch, though he still sought his parents' advice on major decisions. Sarah had married a schoolteacher and lived in town, giving them 2 grandchildren who visited every Sunday. James, at 20, was studying to become a veterinarian, wanting to help ranchers care for their animals. On a warm evening in June, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration of Yates and Amelia's anniversary. The house was full of laughter and conversation, grandchildren running through rooms that had once seemed so large and now felt cozy and lived in. After dinner, as the family gathered on the expanded porch to watch the sunset, William stood up with a wrapped package. Mother, Father, we all wanted to do something special for your anniversary, so we put our heads together and came up with this. Amelia unwrapped the package to find a large framed photograph of the entire family, taken by the new photographer in town. But it was not just a photograph. Around the edges, their children had written memories and messages, creating a tribute to the family they had built. To the strongest woman I know, William had written. You taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear win. To my father, Sarah had written, who showed me that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. To my parents, James had written, who proved that the best things in life are worth fighting for. Amelia read each message through tears, and when she finished, she could not speak. Yates wrapped his arm around her, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "You have given us a good life," William said. "A good home and a good example. We wanted you to know that we see it and we are grateful." That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Yates and Amelia sat in their bedroom, the room that had been added when William was born and had served as their sanctuary ever since. 25 years, Amelia said, still looking at the framed tribute from their children. "It seems like forever and like no time at all. Do you have any regrets?" She thought about it, really considered the question. "No. I wish Thomas had not died, but I cannot regret the life we have built. I cannot regret our children or our ranch or our years together. My first marriage was cut short by tragedy, but it was not erased. It is part of my story, part of who I am, and you never asked me to forget it or pretend it did not matter. It made you who you are. How could I want you to forget that?" She set down the frame and turned to face him. "You are a remarkable man, Yates Drummond. Do you know that? I am just a cowboy who saw a woman in trouble and wanted to help. No, you are the man who bought a widow's wedding ring and kept it safe until the right moment. You are the man who worked for months without pay just to keep me from losing my home. You are the man who loved me enough to be patient while I learned to love again. You are anything but ordinary." He pulled her close, marveling as he always did at how perfectly she fit against him. "You want to know a secret? When I bought that ring back from the pawnbroker, I had no plan. I just knew I could not leave town without trying to help you. I thought maybe I would give it back and ride away. I never imagined this. Never imagined a family, a ranch, a lifetime together." "What changed your mind about riding away? You did. The first time I saw you really smile, the first time you laughed, the first time you looked at me like I was more than just a hired hand. Every day I fell a little more in love with you, and every day it became harder to imagine leaving. I am glad you stayed. Me too." They made love that night with the tenderness and familiarity of long partnership, but also with a passion that had never quite faded. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Amelia said, "Do you remember what you said to me that first winter? That you were tired of drifting, I remember. Did you ever miss it? The freedom of the trail, of being able to go wherever you wanted. Not once. Freedom is not about being able to go anywhere. It is about wanting to stay where you are. And I have never wanted to be anywhere but here, with you." The next morning, Yates woke early as he always did, his body still trained to ranch hours even though William did most of the heavy work now. He found Amelia already awake, standing at the window and looking out at their land as the sun rose. "Cannot sleep?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "I was just thinking about that winter, the one that started everything. I remember standing at this window, or where this window is now. The cabin was smaller then. I remember feeling so alone, so hopeless. I thought my life was over, that I was just going through the motions until I could not anymore. And now I look out and I see our ranch, our life, everything we built together. I see our grandchildren playing in the yard where I used to stand alone. I hear laughter in the house where there was only silence. That winter was the hardest time of my life, but it brought me to you. It taught me that endings can also be beginnings if you are brave enough to see them that way." Yates wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "You were always brave, even when you did not feel it. We were brave together. That is the secret, I think. Alone, I might have given up, but together we could face anything." They stood there for a long time, watching the sun paint their land in shades of gold and amber, holding each other and thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Outside, they could hear the ranch coming to life, the sounds of cattle and horses and the men starting their workday. In the years that followed, they gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to William. transitioning from active management to advisory roles. They had earned their rest, but neither of them could imagine fully retiring. The ranch was in their blood, as much a part of them as their own heartbeats. Yates taught his grandsons to ride and rope and brand, passing down the skills he had learned over a lifetime. Amelia taught her granddaughters to keep accounts and manage a household and stand their ground when men tried to tell them what they could or could not do. Together, they made sure the next generation understood the value of hard work, the importance of family, and the power of love. On a crisp October day in 1910, as they celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, Amelia pulled out the old wooden box that held her first wedding ring. She had not looked at it in years, but something made her want to see it now. The ring gleamed softly in the lamplight, untarnished by time. She picked it up and read the inscription again. Thomas and Amelia, 1871. "I have not looked at this in so long," she said. "It does not hurt any more to see it. It just makes me feel grateful. Grateful for the love I had with Thomas and grateful for the love I have with you. I got to have two great loves in my life. How many people can say that? You deserved both," Yates said. "And more." She put the ring back in the box and closed it gently. "I think I am going to give this to William. He should have his mother's first wedding ring to understand where he came from and the man who would have been his father if things had been different. He deserves to know that whole story. That is a good idea." She reached for Yates's hand, squeezing it tightly. "But you are his father in every way that matters. You raised him, taught him, loved him. That ring is history, but you are his present and his future." Next Sunday, when the family gathered as they always did, Amelia gave William the box. "This was my wedding ring from my first marriage, to your father's first namesake. Thomas Kendrick was a good man, and I want you to have this, to remember that you come from love on all sides." William opened the box and stared at the ring for a long moment. At 33, he was older now than Thomas had been when he died, with a wife and children of his own. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said quietly. "I will keep it safe and make sure the story is passed down. That is all I ask." Years continued their relentless march, bringing changes both small and large. The automobile arrived in Fort Bridger, a noisy contraption that frightened the horses but promised to revolutionize travel. Electricity came to town, though the ranch remained lit by lamps and candles. Yates and Amelia too set in their ways to embrace such newfangled technology. In 1915, as war raged in Europe and the world seemed to be changing faster than anyone could comprehend, Yates and Amelia celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. They were both in their 70s now, slowed by age but still sharp in mind and spirit. The celebration was smaller this time, just immediate family, as many of their friends from earlier years had passed on. But it was no less meaningful, with toasts and stories and the comfortable warmth of people who had spent a lifetime together. After the party, as twilight settled over the ranch, Yates asked Amelia to take a walk with him. They moved slowly now, their steps careful on the uneven ground, but they walked hand in hand as they had done for decades. He led her to the spot where he had first stood all those years ago, looking at her ranch and trying to decide whether to approach. The cabin had been expanded so many times it was barely recognizable. The barn had been replaced twice. New corrals had been built and old ones torn down. But the land itself remained constant, eternal, unchanging beneath the temporary structures humans built upon it. "This is where I decided to stay," he said. "Right here. I could have ridden on, found work somewhere else, lived a different life, but I saw you and I made a choice. I am glad you did. So am I. Every single day I am grateful for that moment, for the courage to approach you, for your courage in letting me stay, for every choice we made that brought us here." She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders as he had done thousands of times before. The gesture was so familiar it was almost automatic, but the feeling behind it had never dimmed. "We did good, did we not?" she asked. "We took all the broken pieces and built something beautiful. We did better than good. We built a legacy." They stood there until the stars came out, until the night grew too cold for old bones. And then they walked slowly back to the house, to the warmth and light, and the family that would carry on after they were gone. Yates Drummond passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night in 1918, at the age of 73. Amelia woke to find him beside her, his hand still in hers, his face peaceful. He had lived a long life, a good life, and he had died as he had lived for the past 40-plus years, next to the woman he loved. The funeral was attended by everyone in the territory who had known him, and many who had only heard stories. They spoke of his integrity, his kindness, his work ethic, his devotion to his family. But what Amelia remembered most clearly was the eulogy William gave, standing straight and strong at the front of the church. "My father taught me that family is not just about blood," William said. "It is about the people who show up, who do the work, who love you even when it is hard. He showed up for my mother when she had nothing. He showed up for me before I was even born. He showed up every single day of his life, and he taught me to do the same. That is his legacy, and it is one I will strive to honor." Amelia lived for 2 more years after Yates died, years that felt both endless and fleeting without him beside her. She stayed in the ranch house, surrounded by family, watching her great-grandchildren play in the yard where her children had once played. On quiet evenings, she would sometimes take out both of her wedding rings, the one from Thomas that William had returned to her after she gave it to him, asking her to keep it just a little longer, and the one from Yates that she still wore on her finger. She would hold them both in her hand and think about the 2 men she had loved, the 2 different lives she had lived, the journey that had brought her from that desperate winter day to this peaceful twilight. She passed away in her sleep on a spring morning in 1920, just as the world was beginning to emerge from the shadow of the Great War. She was 78 years old, and she died as she had lived the last 40-plus years of her life, surrounded by the evidence of love. At her funeral, Sarah read from a letter Amelia had left for the family. "I have been blessed beyond measure," it said. "I loved deeply twice and was loved deeply in return. I built a life from nothing, not once but twice. I raised children and watched them raise children of their own. I have seen hard times and good times, and I have learned that the difference between the 2 is often just perspective and perseverance. To my family, I leave this land and this legacy. Care for it as your father and I cared for it. Love each other as we loved you. And remember that winter ends, that spring always comes, that hope is never wasted. I am going now to join the 2 men who shaped my life, and I go without regret, knowing that I lived fully and loved well." William inherited the ranch and ran it for another 30 years before passing it to his own son. The Drummond Ranch remained in the family for generations, each new generation hearing the story of how it all began, of a widow who sold her wedding ring and a cowboy who bought it back, of a winter that brought 2 people together and a love that lasted a lifetime. The rings themselves became family treasures, passed down through the years. Thomas's ring eventually went to one of Amelia's great-great-granddaughters, who wore it on a chain around her neck on her own wedding day, honoring the man she had never met but whose love had shaped her family's history. Yates's ring was passed to William's youngest son, who gave it to his wife as a promise of the kind of love his grandparents had shared. But the real legacy was not in gold or land, or even in the family that carried on their name. It was in the story itself, in the proof that love could bloom in the hardest times, that kindness could change lives, that two broken people could heal each other and build something lasting. Winter had made the widow sell her wedding ring, but it had also brought her a cowboy who saw her strength and loved her for it. He had bought back that ring and returned it to her, but more importantly, he had given her back her hope, her future, and eventually his heart. And in return, she had given him a home, a family, and a love that lasted until their final breaths and beyond, echoing through the generations that followed, a testament to the transformative power of compassion, courage, and enduring love.